Welcome to the Commonwealth Club. I'm George Hammond, Chair of the Humanities Forum. Tonight we're doing another one of our Monday Night Philosophy series. And tonight we're going to talk about political philosophy. I don't often spend my time on that, but it seems like it's the right time to talk about it. So first I'd like to start with a story. Washington Mall. So when I was 8 years old, our family went to Washington, D.C. My father was the mayor of Kenosha, Wisconsin. There was a big mayor's convention. Kennedy was the president. Well, we went and we saw Kennedy at the White House. And one day we were at the Washington Monument. We were walking around the Washington Monument. And those of you who've been there, looking around, well, there's a lot of grass around there. And my dad said, "Where is the reflecting pool?" So I said, "Well, I don't see it either." And we were looking around. Never found the reflecting pool. So the next day, we're at the Lincoln Memorial, and we were standing right about here, right? And we were looking out, and I was coming down the stairs with my dad, and I said, "There it is, there's the reflecting pool." And he said to me, "That's a stupid place to put it." And that's why at 8 years of age, I realized that authority is not always accurate. Because I could tell right away, that's a really good place to put it. If you look carefully, you can see if you're up by the Washington Monument, there's all that grass around it, and you don't necessarily see the reflecting pool, but it's obvious from this point of view. So that was one thing, even when the authority is very reasonable. My father was a very good authority figure, and he was very genial most of the time, but this time, it was very clear he had it wrong. And so I learned very early that perspective on things. And another perspective that I think is useful to get in mind here, especially for our age group, for those of you who are in a similar age group to me, is that if there was an 8-year-old in the audience today, and I was talking to him about having been at the White House with John F. Kennedy, it would be a lot like if when I was 8 years old at the White House and I ran into a septuagenarian and he said to me, "Oh, have you been here before?" And I said, "No, I haven't been here before. Have you been here before?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I was here once when I was a boy. Actually, I was about your age. I was here." And I said, "Oh yeah." He said, well, what was it like?" He said, "It was really good. I got to meet President Grover Cleveland." That's exactly the same number of years from 61 to 1896 as from now to thing. So for those of you who think everybody knows JFK, how many of you knew about Grover Cleveland when you were young? So it's really a valuable perspective to keep about what's really going on sometimes. So a little perspective. Now, let's start with some very interesting demographic facts. So how many minds are there on this planet? Minds, I include the animal. So there's about 8 billion human beings, right? There's about 130 billion other mammals. 130 billion. There's 3.5 trillion fish. There are quintillions of insects. And there's sextillions of bacteria, So let's not count the bacteria or the insects. The insects just look too weird, so we won't count those. But even so, humanity is only 0.2% of the life on this planet. 0.2%. So whenever you're feeling kind of jealous of the 1%, just remember you're a human being. You're one of the 0.2% already just by being human. In how we go about doing things. And I think it's important, to look at that whole framework of how many people there are and what's going on so that you understand a little bit about where we are. Now, I talked a couple of years ago in March 2024, when I did my lecture then, about who are we? And I talked about what the possibilities were. And there's 3 main possibilities that are believed in today. The first possibility is that we're an accident of chance, that it comes from the Big Bang, and now here we are. And it's more or less determined because the laws just keep moving on. And then there's the idea that God created us, or a committee of gods created us. So I kind of lump those two together. I know people don't like that, but it's the same basic idea. So that's another possibility. And then there's the possibility that we reincarnate, that our minds are actually, something. A lot of people think that they're immaterial, but I think they would be something material, made out of light, something, energetic, not easily weighed, but something. Because we have a lot of experiences that don't match the theory about that it's all an accident and it's all a matter of chance. And people have come up with lots of different explanations, not many of which make much sense, but we know that they aim at some of our deeply fundamental emotional reasons for thinking about life. Okay, so, but what I concluded then, I'm going to remind everybody of, and that is that it's really interesting that that whole area of metaphysics is not important for understanding what we should do with each other. Because our personalities are our personalities regardless of what the answer is to that question. If any of those three are the right answer, we'll probably never have a definitive answer to those things, and we'll probably all disagree with each other. But that doesn't matter too much when it comes to trying to develop our political institutions and how we do things with each other. So I thought I would talk tonight about, let's call it a metaphor. It might be reality, but let's call it a metaphor about why we're in the situation that we're in with the human race and what we can do about it. Because most of the people, certainly the people that are here, are always hoping that we can do something better, we can organize something better. Now, a lot of other people don't care whether we organize anything better or not. But everybody here, you show an interest in it, so let's talk about how we can organize things better. But before I get to that point, I think we need to understand a little bit about who we're dealing with. Because a lot of people try to have a plan for the human race, and they don't really want any humans in the plan, which is a big problem because, it's kind of hard. So I would look at it this way. Let's just assume that humanity has been here about what we can tell, So it's been going on for at least a couple 100,000 years, maybe a couple million years. But we do only have recorded history for 5,000 years, but people can kind of tell. So let's go back about 12,000 years or so, as we know that things were happening then that were human. And about 12,000 years ago, their estimate is that there were about 2 million human beings on the planet. 12,000, 2 million human beings. Now, the last time I died in 1910, there were only 1.75 billion people. 1.5, so about 2 billion. So from 2 million to 2 billion in 12,000 years. And in the last 115 years, we now have 8 billion. So from 2 billion to 8 billion almost in 115 years. That's very fast growth. Let's hope the insects didn't grow that fast while we're during that time. So there's a couple things I want to say about that. One is, what did the PR firm for humanity do during that century to cause so many more people to want to be humans? Because, especially in the middle, we gave them a tough job. Because the 20th century was the middle of all those worldwide wars, and everybody was killing each other and stuff like that. But even so, we went from 2 billion to 8 billion. So that PR firm has got to be congratulated. Really, a lot of people came in. And why did they come in? Well, indoor plumbing, all kinds of improvements in medicine. I hate to mention vaccines because some might not like that, but vaccines certainly had a big impact as well. And let's not forget TV, radio, the internet, all that entertainment. All that entertainment is going on, and that's why we're very interested in living here. I mean, there's so much going on that has made life so much more enjoyable in the last century. All right, but that leaves us with a quandary. This is for those who just came in, this is either a metaphor or reality, doesn't really matter. So we're in a quandary. Let's just say that minds become human. And let's say that 12,000 years ago, when there was 2 million people, that there were only 4 or 5 million minds that were being human at some of the time. I mean, sometimes you're dead, sometimes you're not dead, that kind of thing. So if you go back now 115 years, we're talking about 5 billion people involved. So that means in the last 115 years, another 15 billion minds have gotten interested in being human. That's what the PR firm did for us. So the question is, we're dealing either that way or in any other way with a large number of newbies, new people. 3/4 of the human race is new. And we want to share in democracy. We want to share power with everyone. And I think it's a good idea. But I think you have to remember when you're doing that when you share power with someone who has not had power before, you can't expect them to act like somebody who's had power 100 times already and knows what the real value is to it, what's the real pleasure that you get from organizing things for other people. No, you're dealing with people who say, well, I learned from so-and-so that the best way when you have power is to steal as much as you can in the shortest amount of time and then go to another country before anybody catches you. So I think that's an important part of the situation. So let's say that 3/4 of the people are newbies. And then we have 1/4 of the people are oldies. Just call them that. And the oldies have all these habits, all of our cultural, civilizational habits, which we have been very keen on for a long time. And one of those cultural habits is that we kind of feel more comfortable having an authority figure telling us what to do. 95% of almost all human institutions have been run in an authoritarian way. And so it shouldn't surprise anybody that people get comfortable when an authoritarian figure says, I know what to do, nobody else can do it as I can do it, just let me take care of everything for you. Now, obviously, some of us don't believe in that or don't get caught up in that. But it's really understandable why a lot of people do. So 3/4 one, 1/4 of another, and then, those first 5 million minds that got involved, that have been involved on and off for the last 12,000 years, sometimes interested, sometimes not interested, and they have learned some things. But one thing I want to say, I'll call that group the ancients. One thing about the ancients that everyone should know is they don't run anything. People worry about the ancients, that they are in charge, like the Trilateral Commission and all the different names for all these groups that people think are running everything. Now, in their fantasies, they might think that they're running things, but they really don't run anything. We are all making this up as we go along, all the time. That's my point of view. We've made this all up. We've made up all of the parts of our civilization. We are now thinking, with a new idea that's not 250 years old, but it really wasn't used much before 250 years ago, that we could have a democracy and that people could vote and have their own issues, have their own input into everything. So those are the 3 groups. I would say the bell curve distribution of humanity can be split. Now, it's arbitrary, and they're not strict divisions. But let's just say there's newbies, there's oldies, and there's these ancients. I'll get back to the ancients because they're kind of a funny group. So I would like to address the newbie group because that's kind of my role. I'd like to welcome to the human race. Very nice that you've joined us. But we have certain expectations of you and how you're going to behave. So I wanted to tell you what it is that we expect of you if you're a newbie. Oh, I'm just kidding. We don't expect you to act any differently than we do, which means you can do anything you want. Everybody does what they want, and nobody can stop you from doing what you want unless they've got you in jail, and et cetera, et cetera. So when anybody tells you that you can't do what you want to do, just remember what 2-year-olds always say. No. The 2-year-olds are there to show us, and I'm going to get back to free will in a little while. But the idea that we can live together is based on a lot of different possibilities that we have made up as we've gone along and we've learned to do. So I have some suggestions. They're not, you have to do this or anything, but I think there are a few ideas. And my analogy for it is, assume that you're in a pre-telephone, pre-electricity state of affairs. And suddenly you jump right to a cell phone, solar-powered, civilization. You can skip right over that whole thing. We've done that in society. And I think 3/4 of the human race could skip right over all the mistakes that we've made and help us create a better civilization. I'm hoping some of them were cats. They usually, that's a good that's a good basis for moving forward as a better human being. But people, when people have joined, they say, this is really weird. I thought this was going to be good, but I'm really worried that everybody's a lunatic, around me, because things are so strange as to how things are being done. And I think whenever you feel that way, it's really important to remember the really important question: compared to what? We are lunatics, but compared to whom are we lunatics? And do we have something more together than other lunatics? Now, maybe the ants and the bees, I always wondered whether the ants and the bees were former human civilizations that kept downsizing to save energy until they ended up in this, so that they could have trillions of them, and they're really organized and all that kind of stuff. So we don't know enough about how they do things to know whether they are better off than we are with their civilization. But we just look at all the other simians, our fellow simians, and I think it's very easy to conclude that we're doing better than they are, and therefore that we can feel comfortable that compared to the other simians, we're doing fine. So these are a couple of the ideas I think would be useful for moving us from the pre-electricity culture directly to a cell phone solar power energy basis for civilization. The first idea is, you're new. I know that human bodies can be very exciting. You go, look at what they do, so on. But everybody else has one. So you don't need to show off what your body can do to other people. People don't like that. So that's the first piece of advice. Second piece of advice is, I know that human mating behavior is weird, but you'll find that it's more complicated, less straightforward than what you're used to, but that also makes it much more popular. So give it a chance. The third thing is recreational poisons. The human race isn't the only one that likes to get drunk. But what's interesting is that recreational poisons are often forbidden by the same people that indulge in the idea that bliss is wonderful, ignorance is bliss, and you should get blissed out, and they call that spirituality. But it's really just basically another form of taking recreational poisons. As someone once commented, it's very ironic, but there is no mention of intellect in heaven. There is no description of any heaven except for maybe the Isles of the Blessed, that Plato talked about, where all the philosophers got to go. Other than that, there is no place that anyone mentions that you have to use your intellect when you get there. It's kind of a really big missing point, right? Don't you think? Because that's where a lot of our pleasure comes from. So I'm pointing that out. Sometimes people are often advertising to you to use recreational poisons in a way which just, it's not terrible, but this is not the way to really be happy. All you have to do is watch for 5 years anybody that does too much of it. And that doesn't usually work out. I don't think there should be a rule against it, but, don't believe everything you hear about it. Okay? So there's another thing that I think would be useful information about us, is that everybody wants to join a group. Everyone wants to be part of something bigger. Why do we all want that? Well, because there's a lot of theories about it, but basically all the theories agree we're individual minds in a huge universe, right? And being an individual mind in a huge universe, you want to belong to something bigger. Okay? Now, ironically, it's one of the easiest things in the world to do as a human being, to belong to something bigger, because there's a large number of oldies who want you desperately to agree with them about what they believe in about life. And they're always out there asking you to join their group. And because why? Because the more people that join their group, it gives them more reason to think maybe they're right about it, but they kind of know they're not. So they want to have everybody join as much as possible. So just some advice to the newbies. All you have to do if you don't want to be alone and you want to be part of a big group is just figure out which group you want to join and go in and say, you believe everything that they say that they believe. And you'll be taken in very eagerly, and you'll become part of their group in no time at all. Now, you might worry that you might get caught lying if you don't really believe that. But the fact is, just lie about it, because they all lie about it too. There isn't a single person who isn't lying about what they believe in these big things. And why do we do this? Why do we all lie about this and get other people to come and agree with our lies? We do it because we don't want to feel alone in this world, but in addition to that, we kind of have the hope that by getting other people to believe, we can then believe it ourselves. It's a lot like online dating, actually. Online dating, does everybody present themselves exactly as they are? No. So everybody's like, okay, look over here. This is who I am. This is who I am. Don't look over here. Look over here. This is who I am. Don't you like who I am? And then when people like who you are, you say, see, that is who I am, because that's who they like. And so you get a little bit of satisfaction. Now, there's an idea that I think can help explain this phenomenon and also give you a way out of the phenomenon. I call it the imagination's horizon, another idea to help you move forward over the nonsense. The imagination's horizon is we all have imaginations. And what do they do? Well, for art and all kinds of things. But one of the things our imagination does is it gives us a way forward in life. It tells us what we're going to do next. What are we going to imagine? And what am I going to do next? What should I achieve? And it's there in all different kinds of forms. People think, the goal of life is to become a millionaire. It only takes about 1 week after you become a millionaire before you begin to want to be a multimillionaire. It doesn't take long. And I think the same thing is true if you want to be enlightened. So you're part of a group that wants to become enlightened. That's the goal of life. If you arrive, you read all kinds of stories about the gurus who've arrived and the saints who've arrived at these states, and everybody believes that they've arrived, and you find next thing they do, they start an organization to try to bring it to everybody else. Wait a minute, you're supposed to be done. What's all this activity going on here? But almost all of them come up with some plan to do something else. And even in the Buddhist philosophy, Buddhism was very unpopular for the first 300 years. Why? Because Buddha said, human desire is the source of all suffering. That's not really a very human thing to encourage people at all. That's very discouraging. The whole thing is a waste of time, and you should just go to nirvana, okay? But there was a Buddhist monk about 300 years later who came up, I don't think he did it intentionally, but he was excited about the idea about bodhisattvas, beings who are on the verge of enlightenment, who then would turn around and help you get to enlightenment, right? Now that made Buddhism very popular. Why? Because now you are more important than the meaning of life. The meaning of life is no longer nirvana. Saving you and getting you to nirvana is more important to someone who's right on the verge of nirvana. Now, that's not explained clearly, but that's the emotional impact of that idea and why it became popular. So this idea, it's not just in one part of the culture, it's everywhere, that we want somebody to come in and tell us how important we are. So I call the imagination's horizon, to finish that idea, the imagination's horizon should be our friend. We should be happy about where we want to go next and thinking these things through. But often we're disappointed that we're not already there, that we're not already this person, and therefore we become disgruntled about our imagination telling us where to go next. Whereas it's really just to think, it's really great that we have an imagination to do that. Now, ironically, when you turn your imagination into your enemy, it becomes a conscience. That's what your conscience is. It's your imagination acting as your own enemy, telling you what you're doing wrong. So maybe the conscience, it's not the best way to move forward with things. The imagination's horizon is much more comfortable for those of you who are new. You could skip right over the whole thing about having a conscience, as I would suggest. So the next thing is the importance of being important. So part of this whole thing is that you really need to be important. Again, going back to the fact that we're individual minds in a huge universe. You want to be important. So you come up with all kinds of ways of doing it, and usually it's hierarchical. And to mention this, in addition to the intellect never showing up in the ideas about the afterlife that anybody has, there is no description of any afterlife that doesn't have a very strict hierarchy of one kind or another, of where you'll fit in, how long you'll be there before you can get higher, and all that kind of thing. Why? Because it's so important to the way we think about things. So, and apparently the intellect isn't. So the importance of being important is there, and what are we going to do about that? Well, I think that there's an easy way out of the importance of being important, a way to solve that problem. And the way to solve the problem is to realize that you are indispensable to yourself. Indispensable. Absolutely indispensable to yourself. You're the only one who can think your thoughts and live your life. Now, you can give it away to somebody else and tell them, you make all my decisions for me, you take care of this, I'll just do whatever you say. But you're still the 2-year-old who can say no anytime you want and take it all back. It's like one of those trusts that you can grab back if the children don't behave properly. And so you really are still in charge the whole time. So as this importance filters in for you and says, okay, I'm indispensable to myself. But that doesn't tell me anything about other people. I want to be indispensable to everybody else. Well, the fact is, they're all indispensable to themselves, and you're not indispensable to them, right? Because you don't live their lives. So recognizing that desire to be indispensable is something you've already accomplished and don't need to go out and accomplish, and there's no way to get rid of it. You're all set. And then all you have to do is say, how valuable can I be to other people? Not indispensable, but how valuable. I can be important. All I have to do is be valuable. And it's the easiest thing in the world to be valuable to other people. All you have to do is give more than you take. It's that simple. And you could be stingy, and you could give just a little bit more than you take, and you'll still be valuable. Or you can give much more than you take and be very valuable to society. Now, it's not measured in money, and sometimes it is, but it's not just measured in money. It's measured in all kinds of different things, artistic contributions, that kind of thing. But somebody who creates a new business and wants to go to Mars and does all kinds of things and spends billions of dollars for people and creates all kinds of things, if he also then asks for $1 trillion to pay him for all that, he's no longer valuable. If he only takes 10 million, he's very valuable. But if he wants $1 trillion, he's not valuable anymore because he's taking more than he's giving. It's that simple. And, it should be really simple for the people who are giving at that level to figure out, it's enough. 100 million is enough. I'm valuable, Stop asking for more, because after that point, it's just a game between the boys as to who's making more money. The number means nothing anymore. So that's the importance of being important. Now, really, another part of this is what I call transcending cruelty. Another very interesting part of our human civilization is that cruelty is not on any religion's list of the deadly sins. Not a single one of them mentions cruelty. In fact, St. Thomas Aquinas, in one of his writings, a brilliant man and a very good man, but he gave the game away a little bit when he said, one of the great pleasures of heaven is being able to look down in hell and see the people suffering for what they've done. That's cruelty. And that's why cruelty is never mentioned, because it's too important. You can go to Harry Potter. Why would anybody put up with Lord Voldemort? The only reason is because he gave people permission to be cruel to other people. And there are all kinds of leaders of one kind or another. Their whole appeal is they're not personally liked, but they give permission to people to be cruel to other people, and therefore they're popular. Because people have this anxiety and the fear and anger in themselves, and they've got to do something with it, and this gives them an outlet for that. It's very unfortunate. We need to deal with that fear and anger in a different way. But cruelty is taking pleasure in other people's pain. The last thing in the world you want is to be with somebody who's taking pleasure in your pain. That's why it's actually probably should be at the top of everyone's list of what's wrong with the way we live our lives. And that's why I say transcending cruelty. And the way that I think you can transcend cruelty is the same thing I talked about, the importance of being important. Realize you're indispensable to yourselves, be valuable to other people, and realize that if you're feeling bad and your reaction to that is to talk to other people in your community and bring them down further so that they feel worse than you, so that you keep your position in the hierarchy, you're going to surround yourself with very unhappy people. Now, they'll be maybe even more unhappy than you, but is that really a good way to go about pursuing happiness? No, it doesn't make any sense. And I'm going to keep talking about this for as long as it takes until people catch that idea, because it's a simple idea. It doesn't take too much to understand that that is an error in our pursuit of happiness. And as you can see, I think one of the things about desire that I disagree with the Buddha on is I don't think human desires are the source of all suffering. Not fulfilling our desires is the source of suffering. Fulfilling our desires is the source of our happiness. So it's not the desire's fault. It's all in the fulfilling or not fulfilling. That's where the issue is. And the only way to get everything that you desire is to be very intelligent about what you desire. But I gave a whole lecture on that one, so we can't cover that one tonight because we got to get to these political things. So that's another aspect of what's going on. Another thing is that there's a lot of talk, not a lot of talk, but a lot of talk against modern medicine right now out there. And you say, maybe what's going on with that? I said, for the newbies, I think you shouldn't buy this. You should especially not buy it because, all of that medicine, they get things wrong. There's no question. I mean, they thought that margarine was better for you than butter for a while, It takes a while until all that science runs through the thing, and the scientists are at least supposed to admit when they're wrong, and most often they do. So that's better than other groups that never admit when they're wrong, right? I understand that they present some of their science as if it's the writ, the holy writ, whatever, because I think that's just an old habit. When you have an idea, you present it that way instead of just giving the arguments. And you can tell who's been scientific for a longer period of time because they do it the scientific way. Well, these are my reasons, and you can either agree with them or disagree with them, but these are my reasons why this looks like a better thing to me. But I'm just telling the newbies that if we hadn't had all this scientific advance, there would be no room for you on this planet as human beings. We would still only have 2 billion people because all those advances are why we have room and the agricultural ability, et cetera, to feed everybody. So you ought to at least be happy about that with science. And the other thing that, if you're new to this, that has changed in the last century, that should give everybody a tender spot in their hearts for science, is solving, not completely, but solving tremendously, the loss of children in the first years of their life, the loss of young mothers to problems in birth and stuff like that. Those numbers have come so far down, and that is a scientific achievement. Again, you can disagree with different parts of it, but overall, this is what's causing advances to take place. So there's that. And another thing that the scientists do, which I think is you don't have to buy, is that they don't believe in free will. A lot of them don't believe in free will. They think everything is determined because there's cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. But there's a lot of logical and reasonable reasons to not buy that argument. It's not completely solid. There's holes in it. I gave a lecture on that, on free will, a year ago, so I won't go into it in great detail. But just think of it. Anything that's anti-entropic, so entropy, the whole universe is moving towards entropy. Anything that's anti-entropic is against that law. And we know that all of life on this planet is anti-entropic. Now, we also know that in the big scheme of things, entropy keeps moving in that direction, and it's like a little blip. But in that blip, we're all living. It's a bubble. It's an anti-entropic bubble. But we're all in there living. And all the minds are moving matter against the law of entropy. That's what all minds do. Even the ants do it. If you see an anthill, you know that there were minds that rearranged things for how they wanted it to be. I think that's why they call it anti-entropic behavior. So if you, she got it. So the Greeks, of course, had this myth of Sisyphus, that he just had to keep rolling the rock up the hill and then come down again and roll it. And I think that that's kind of the idea of entropy. So, but we're Californians, right? So I have a different image for what we're doing in this world. So we're on the beach, the waves are crashing in, huge waves are crashing in, huge waves are crashing in. And what do? Those waves crashing endlessly is the whole universe moving towards entropy. And what do we do as humans? We make surfboards, we try to surf it, we try to, go rearrange matter the way we want to. And if you just have this image of us tunneling, going through a tunnel, total beauty all around us, looking really cool, elegant, skilled, zoom, like that's to me our anti-entropic behavior in the middle of entropy. That's much better than the Sisyphus myth. It's cool. And I think it's what we're doing. And yes, the water will eventually crash, but in the meantime, we're having a great time doing what we can in the world of entropy that's crashing all around us. So, with that idea, how can we organize our affairs so that it's cooler, so that we have more fun, there's more beauty, and that we can move forward without always worrying about being told what to do, not just by our parents, but by everybody else. So, I think democracy can be improved a lot by certain rules. I'm not in favor of trying to trade horses in midstream, right now, because we have a very good constitution, we have a very good way of doing things. It causes problems, it's got little, issues left over. There were a lot of compromises that were made at the time it was created 250 years ago that have worked out very well, but there are a lot of things that they didn't want to happen that have happened exactly why they were afraid of. For example, the two-party system, they did not want political parties to get started. It only took about 4 years before they did. So there were all kinds of things that went wrong. But I still think we keep adjusting. But I have, as I say, some short-term fixes for America. And the short-term fixes for America are 4 different amendments. And I think actually, and I wouldn't propose them because I am a realist, I wouldn't propose them, but I didn't think there was a chance of them getting through. I know there have been very few amendments that have gotten through in a long time. But both the Democrats and the Republicans have been shooting themselves in their foot on each of these issues for so long that they might agree with each other that maybe it's a good time to change that rule. So the first one is on gerrymandering. We know that was a really big, issue for a long time, because for the last 40 years or so, everyone's trying to keep making the congressional seats safer and safer and safer for the incumbent by drawing the lines in ways that made sure that they were in the majority. And both parties agreed with each other in the states, trying to get their things so that they would, have it safe. And I think that the statistics are that 96% of the congressional seats are just rolled over in the same party over and over and over again. This isn't really democracy, in case anyone has paid attention to that, but it's a very easy fix. A very easy fix. Every 10 years at the census, you give the results to the computer and you say, in each state, there's so many different seats and so on, each state, with the shortest lines possible, draw relatively equal groups of population. You'd be able to look at that map and tell that it was done without cheating, because the lines would have to be pretty straight. And every 10 years it would change. And yes, it would go through some people's backyards, but we are so used to that now with the gerrymandering that shouldn't make a difference. I mean, it used to be that it was by county and stuff like that. But if you just let the computer do it, that would take care of it. Now, would the political parties want to give up that power? Maybe, maybe not. But they know that they're both in trouble because their extreme wing in both parties are the ones that control a lot of what's going on and have a big influence, way outsized influence, over the number of people that actually want that to happen. So it's possible that that could be done. The next one is what I call senators at large. I think that in an election, if you said that the people who came in second for president and vice president automatically became senators at large in the Senate, that you would change the quality of the elections tremendously, because whoever was running and who won will have to work, and the most influential people in the Senate would be the people that they just defeated, right? And I also think that when a president and a vice president are done or now voted out of office, that they should also be able to go in as senators at large. So that we'd have up to 4 senators at large in the Senate. And I have a bigger idea for that I'll go to later for democracy in the future, but I think we could do something like that now, because that way a president's never a lame duck, because he's going to go from being president to being one of the most influential senators for the next term, and then could run again, whatever. But in the meantime, he's not stuck at Mar-a-Lago or something like that. And so he doesn't lose as much. And he will work on projects that last longer than his term, because he's going to be working on them then. Of course, he can retire if he wants to. But that way, and you know, you have to think about it. If you're president, you've gotten 60, 70 million votes, you know, or more. If came in second, you got 60 to 65 million votes. A lot of people want you to be in national government. So you should be able to have a role for that. And so you senators at large, I mean, you cover the whole nation, you take care of that. So that's another one. Another limit would be an age limit. I just arbitrarily picked 70. I think you should have an age limit that when you take the oath of office, you should be under 70 years old. You know, before a term as president. Not for senator. If you long term, I'd say 80, 85 for senators, but 70 for president, because it's such an important job and you have to make all those decisions. It's really not, I think both parties have seen that however good the people are that have been president, they would have been a lot better if they'd been president 20 years earlier than when they're in their 70s and 80s. It's just not the right time. Another short-term amendment that I think nobody will give up, but I think it's a really good idea because it's in the Constitution, original Constitution, and for no particular reason, and that's the pardon power. Why do we give the president the right to pardon anybody that they want to? I think if you can look at all the uses of the pardon power, there could be maybe 2 or 3 uses that were useful. All the rest of them, I mean, they were useful to raise money for the presidential libraries that they were trying to create, stuff like that. But in general, that shouldn't be the way people get out of whatever it is that you've determined them to be. So those are the 4 amendments I would suggest now, and as I said, I wouldn't do it. But now the big ideas about democracies for the future are, to me, the most important reform that needs to be done is to change the rules of the game so that more responsible people are willing to run for office. You know, who's going to run? You know, the way it is now, you have to give your soul to the party, you have to give your soul to your donors, you have to give your soul to all kinds. Who wants to be in that position, who can do well in life without having to do all that? Because even when you're in power, you're still under the thumb of all those people. It's enough when you're in business, you know how many thumbs you're under. You can imagine what it'd be like there. So I think there are ways to change the rules of the game so that other people will go. It's a little like, you know, if you have one game and it's hockey and you have another game and it's tennis, you know, different people try out for those sports, right? And so, and play the game differently. All right, so one way to do that is for the elections to be changed. So instead of, the parties can exist, I'm not trying to get rid of them. But, you know, right now there's a lot of election reform about, you know, stacked voting and all that kind of stuff. I'm a lot more radical than that. I think the elections should be much more like the elections for the all-star team in a sport, or for the Olympic team. That is, a large number of people run, and some are clearly going to make it, and some are going to be in the area of not being able to make it. And so this is the way I thought of doing it, that you could have a primary, say in May, instead of spending 3 years at these things every time, a primary in May where every citizen could write down 5 names that they wanted to see in national government. And the representation would not be geographical anymore. I understand why it was done 250 years ago. But we don't need geographical representation. What we need is our ideas to be represented. What ideas do you want to be done in government? You want somebody who represents those ideas and how that's being done. And so it could be all national. So I would say a Senate of 50 people, and that's all you would need. You don't need the other representatives. And everybody nominates 5 people. And then, you give them some time to go through all those names and everything like that. The computers won't take too long. And then you say, the top 150 people can run for the Senate among all those names. And the top 10 can run for president if they want to, out of the 150 names. Right? You let the summer go by, because nobody's going to pay attention. And then in September, at the beginning of September, you have another primary. And in that primary, you take the 10 that are running for president, and everybody gets to vote for one. And you take the 140 people, and everybody gets to vote for 5. And then you keep the top 70 people still running for Senate, even though there's only 50 places. And in October, you only have one thing, which is you cut down the presidential primary to 4 people. And then those 4 people, those 4 people came out of the other one. Those people can run for president, and that's the only primary, so everybody focuses on the 4 people, top people. And the 2 top people that come out of that get to run for president, and they can pick a vice president from anybody and they're going to pick somebody that's getting lots and lots of votes, obviously, right? Then you'd have the election in November, one for each. The person who wins becomes president, vice president. The ones who lose become senators. And then you have, and if the president that's already in and the vice president, if they want to, they become senators. And then the next 46 people that are at the top of the election, again, 5 are voted for. Those people come in. So the Senate would be made up of people who are getting, so like the top 10 would be getting 50, 40, 35 million votes. And then there'd be people, 45th, 46th, 47th, 48th, who are maybe getting 10, 15 million votes, right? So there'd be a stable part of the Senate, and there'd be where people come in and come out. But the other thing that I would do that would make a big difference is that the Senate, the senators, would have 2 functions. One, you take the departments of the government and make them 10 different departments, whatever, and every senator would serve on the boards of 2 of those departments for a year, and then switch to 2 other departments for a year, and have 5-year terms. They end up sitting for 1 year on each of the departments. And one little wrinkle on that is if you're on the board of the State Department, the International Relations Department, you're also on the Defense Department, so that you would be managing both the diplomacy and the military at the same time, so that you would know what each side is on. And the department would be run by 10 senators, 4 people that are employees, the top employees in that department, and someone appointed by the president as chairman. So, and not only would you make the laws for that, but you would run it. So you'd make the laws for those departments, but you would also operate it as an operating thing so that you're really aware of it. Now, I don't have a lot of time to explain a lot of other things about it, but the end result is, Plato thought that you should, teach the future guardians of the Republic 30 years of math so that they would get more reasonable before they became a leader. Well, in this case, what I would suspect is that if you ran a democracy like that the senators would all have to experience, each of the departments of our company, of how we run things. And the people who rise, they rise in the number of people who are voting for them on a national basis because they're appealing to more and more people on the ideas that they have, not on the money that they're raising and not on who else they're appealing to, but on how effective they have been. And then you do a term, and then you return to the Senate, and you could become the president again for a few times, but always just 1 term at a time, and always part of that whole system, so that you would have it as an educational system. All right. So That's a couple of the ideas. I have too many ideas to cover tonight, but I'll tell you about a couple more. So one of them is tax reform. We haven't figured out yet that we're the ones who are taxed ourselves in a democracy, right? We don't, we still think we're in a monarchy, where you have to hide all the taxes. And that makes it 10 times as expensive to raise the money. Now, you could make one simple system. You could get rid of all of the subsidies that we give people and all the taxes that we have. And by the way, I think the corporate income tax, this is going to be one of my most unpopular ideas. The corporate income tax is just a hidden sales tax. And as a hidden sales tax, it just increases the cost of whatever they do. But much worse than that, it takes 1 million of our brightest people trying to help those corporations avoid the tax. Almost no money is taken up, and it's just, and it makes all kinds of business decisions. We're all in debt because of that, because the interest that you pay on your debt covers your profits, so you don't have to pay taxes on it. We could actually move from debtism back to capitalism if you change that rule. But anyway, so all the taxes go away. You have one thing, and the Senate would only have control over one thing about the tax code, and that is they set the break-even point. So let's just imagine that the break-even point would be $50,000 right now. And you get taxed on 40% of everything that you make above the break-even point, and you get a subsidy of 40% for everything you make less than the break-even point. So if you make zero, you get 40% of that, so $20,000. And as society got richer, the break-even point would go up, because that's the one thing that could be done, because you'd have to take all the money that's coming from the top down to the bottom and then figure out how much you need in order to give everybody that 20% and everything. And if you made $40,000 a year, you would get still a little subsidy, et cetera. So people would be willing to do jobs that aren't as productive. Another element of it was every individual would be treated individually. So people who are stuck financially because they married the person that seemed like they were going to be nice and now controls them totally and everything, all the freedom would all be returned to everybody, because everybody would have a right to this much at least. But I don't like just saying how much it would be, because that can create incentives for inactivity. And if people became less and less active and saying, well, I can live on 20,000, and then the next year the break-even point would go down, then they'd say, I can live on 18,000. The next year would go down to 16,000. So it's built in that it would keep moving down and up based upon what it is. And everybody at the bottom would realize that the more money that the rich people made, the more money that they would get as a subsidy. So society would be able to see much more clearly that this is a partnership that we're all in. And there are lots of partnerships in business where that is basically how things are done. And you can also go back to the pirate ships. If they were successful, even the lowest guys got 1 or 2% of what was going on, right? So that's a simple way to fix the whole complicated system, because the more complicated it is, the more you're trying to adjust reality, but letting people individually adjust reality with their own individual desires, we know that works better. We just don't really believe it, because a lot of people in charge want to make rules of how everybody else has to follow them. That goes back to the usual authoritarianism. So tax reform, prison reform, don't have time to talk about that. But I think basically it should be that people are restrained from being part of society when their behavior doesn't work, but given as much freedom as possible to live their lives, because free will is the most important thing that we have in life, and to take it away is just destructive to them and their ability to recover and come back. So another thing is foreign policy. How would we do foreign policy? It's very important right now with what's going on in Iran, because I had an idea 40 years ago or so, and it was mainly aimed at the communist empires. And it was, are you going to be free? Are you going to be free with your people? And to me, the freedom would be, you let your people leave if they want to. You let your people take vacations if they want to outside the country, so they can tell whether they want to leave or not. And if someone is arrested for political reasons, that you send them into exile rather than put them in prison. And if a country does those three things, then other countries will not interfere with their form of government. So you give them an incentive to do it. My idea towards the world is you take what's the worst thing that we do to each other and try to eliminate that first. And when that's eliminated from the world, then we move up to the next thing, the second worst thing that we've been doing to each other, and then the third worst thing. And hopefully we would actually get off of that first worst thing, but maybe never. But to me, the worst thing is slavery, the taking away the free will of people. So I think you could build that kind of a foreign policy even into the Constitution. So that said, a couple of ideas about that. I think one of the things for me is, I feel like I'm the oldest friend of the human race, and I just keep getting older, and I think the reason for wanting to do something is that I've been complaining for a long time. I tried to complain humorously, but I've been complaining for a long time, and I actually have adopted the approach of never complain, just explain how things can be done, because I think that will be more productive. But that has changed some of my dreams. I have to say that it's changed me radically in a way which has been very useful to me personally. But I have to admit that I no longer dream that all people could become more virtuous. I don't dream that humanity is perfectible, that human beings are perfectible. I don't dream that we could have world peace. My idea towards world peace is very simple. If it's like baseball. All of our civilizations, what's the best we've done? Most civilizations are batting in the 100s or 200s. Maybe 300, best civilization in the 300s. I'm really interested in trying to move us towards 350. I don't think we should talk about world peace until everybody's batting 900, because it's just not possible. And to get us from here to there, you always have to take the steps that make it work on the way there. So I've changed my dream that way too. But I'm still a dreamer, and I still have dreams that are just more realistic dreams. I really do dream that people can understand themselves better and their personalities better and make better decisions as a result of understanding themselves better. And I do believe that we can come up with democratic institutional incentives in our institutions that will bring out the best in us. Now, maybe the best in us isn't what we dream of, but the best in us is better than letting the worst of us come out or even the mediocre in us come out. And if we can bring out the best in people, then I think within time, the worst of what we do will start to disappear. And the worst of what we do is cruelty to each other. And that is definitely worth working on, to even step by step to try to remove it. I still dream that's possible. I dream that we can learn to desire more intelligently, that we can transcend cruelty, that we will be happier if we do. And I still dream that we can dream better dreams, other dreams, and better ones. Maybe only slightly better, but that's still better. And so when I think of all those dreams that I have, I also think, hey, maybe you're not realistic enough. Yet, maybe that's too much dreaming still. And I am a realist. I know that I'm a realist. But I'm a realist who realizes that I'm still a dreamer. Thank you. Now, after all that, I imagine you don't have any questions. Anybody like to ask a question?
Thank you so much. That was magnificent and really moving, especially at a time such as this. And so my question is probably the question you might have been expecting. How do you see the role of AI in all of this?
Well, AI helped me because, I have a dream, and I'm on the Washington Monument, on the Lincoln Memorial Mall here. That was intentional on my part, in addition to the joke up front. But as you can tell, the audience is relatively small. So I think AI, like any other tool, it can help us and it can hurt us. Depends on who's in charge and who's doing it and who's using it, etc. So I really think it's too soon to say with any technology. As a writer, I will have to say that it's going to make the mediocre writers, feel bad. But the best writers are still going to do well. Maybe that'll be the way that you can tell that you're a really good writer is you can write better than AI, which might get smaller and smaller as time goes by, but it will always be true, just like can live theater always outdo a movie? Well, lots of if it's local live theater and it's your local neighbors doing it, maybe not. But some live theater definitely outdoes movies. It depends on who's doing it, how they're doing it. And the higher the technology goes, the better, maybe the smaller number of people can do this. But you can, one of my analogies for that is, like if you went back 150 years, the local musicians would all perform for everybody, and everybody enjoyed going out, on a summer night and listening to the music and stuff like that. Now that we have all this wonderfully performed music everywhere, people would make fun of them for playing so badly. And it's unfortunate, but that's mostly true. But still, the great music and the people who get to perform keeps getting more and more people, and more people are really fantastic at it. So another way I look at it is you can always have full employment again if you outlaw copy machines. Right? But is that an intelligent thing to do, right? So the mic is over here if anybody has another question.
You made a remark that there's no talk of any philosophy or intellectual activity in heaven. Uh-huh. And of course, we don't know what heaven would be like, or even if there is one. Right. But and how the fact that they don't talk about philosophy would seem to be, if heaven is what they say it is, then there would be no philosophy in heaven, because most philosophy is made with the goal of improving life or people's conditions in the world, and presumably in heaven there's no need for that.
That's the theory, yeah.
Yeah.
But the same theories almost always include a hierarchy, and that some minds are higher than others. There's different levels of angels, or there's different levels of bodhisattvas or gods or whatever. And so knowing human beings, once they got to heaven, they'd say, great, I've arrived. But if we're anything like we are, within a couple of weeks we'd be saying, how am I going to get up to that level? It's like being in Boy Scouts. You become a star scout and you want to go to life right away and then get to Eagle. It's the way everything is set up, because those organizations know what we're up to.
I assumed that either the only level above us is in heaven is God, or that maybe we reunite with God the same way that a drop of rain reunites with the ocean.
Exactly. But you know what?
In that case, there'd be no hierarchy.
Maybe. But when you say it's exactly like that, I do, lots of people that I've studied all use the same ocean analogy. But the fact is, if all the individual drops disappeared, there'd be no ocean. The ocean is just a bunch of individual drops. And that's what I think life is like. I think life is an eternal democracy. And I think that because we are competitive with the other drops around us, we will always want to be on the cutting edge of the wave that's hitting the shore, with the light shining in this particular way. We don't want to be way down at the bottom where it's all dark. That's the way we're going to be. So even if that is true, that's all God is the ocean, he's just a bunch of individual minds cohering together. I certainly think that we connect with each other. But I do think that a lot of the spiritual experiences that lead to the conclusion that are slight exaggerations or conclusions about what it is that they experienced. So, but that's not the first time that we've exaggerated. And exaggerating gets us someplace, it keeps us moving. And our minds should be free to move and enjoy things more and more. And that really, to me, is what's really useful about a theory that says it doesn't really matter whether we die or don't die. Because while we're alive, we are living. So when if this is one of the ideas that I think maybe I didn't get to this one for the newbies, but people are worried about death. There's absolutely no reason to worry about death, because there's only two possibilities. Either you're dead, and therefore you can't be upset that you're dead. You can't be unhappy that you're dead, and fear is just your anticipation that you're going to be unhappy. So if you realize that when you're dead, you're not there, you can't anticipate you're going to be unhappy. You can anticipate you're not going to exist. And that might make you unhappy now, but the death itself isn't going to make you unhappy if you don't exist. You won't be there to claim it. And the people who believed in it in an afterlife, they're not going to be unhappy that they were wrong, because they're not there to find out that they were wrong. So I turn Pascal's wager on its head and say it's really the wrong way to look at it. And if we do exist after we die, because we aren't just our bodies, that our minds are made of something else. And I do think it would be something else. It's not immaterial. It would be some other material, just not biological. That if we are something else, then we're going to be the same people that we were before. And there's two really important things about that. One, if you like yourself, you're all set. If you don't like yourself, you might as well start working on it now, because if you don't want to do that for all eternity, worried about yourself. And the other part of it is that if when we die, we still exist, then the afterlife is going to be very similar to what we do here, because all the personalities are going to be the same. And maybe they will not do things in exactly the same way, but if the ones who supposedly are talking to people and telling them what it's like on the other side that you hear about, every one of them talks about the hierarchy and how valuable the hierarchy is and how far you can get up in the hierarchy. That sounds so much like what we're doing here. And just one last aside there. Shirley MacLaine became famous, the actress, became famous for saying that she had a spirit guide that was talking to her. And the spirit guide had been a pickpocket in 15th century London. And I thought, surely you would not listen to a pickpocket. No? Why? I don't care if he's on the other side. If he's a pickpocket, why are you taking all your advice about what's going to happen on the other side from a guy who pickpockets in London in the 15th century? It's just, I think the other side, we're similar. And I think it should make you also feel good about everybody else, because you know how tough it is to be an individual mind in a huge universe, right? And everybody else is in the same shoes. And I think, as plenty of thinkers have pointed out, if you could see what suffering somebody went through before they came up with the conclusions they did about how things should run and stuff like that, you would understand much better the decisions that they make. Because even if they're not reasonable about it in a way which is critical thinking and all that kind of thing, it's reasonable to them that they experience it that way, right? And so there's two things about that. One, it helps you understand other people a lot better. For example, partisanship. Partisanship, what is it? It just lets you know that people lie all the time, because when you're a partisan for any group, the definition of being a partisan is that you excuse or give it a reason for the people's behavior who are part of your group, which are exactly the same behaviors that you condemn in other people who are not part of your group. That's exactly what partisanship is. And so it really is just a form of lying to protect ourselves, right? And so when we understand that about other people and put ourselves in their position of it, we can feel a lot better about what they're doing, even if they're not doing things that we like. We at least know that they have some reason for it. And knowing that they have some reason for it should give you some hope that there's a chance that reason might eventually prevail. Thank you very much.